Hey, YouTubies, I want to talk about this article. Early human ancestor Lucy died falling out of a tree. Now, before I talk about Lucy, who's this ancient hominid they found out of Africa, I want to talk a little bit about some comments I got on my YouTube channel. And somebody was asking about my mythological unification theory and trying to get me to agree that they were all rooted in African culture and mythology. And I talked to this person a little bit and tried to explain that every culture has their own story. My mythological unification theory states that these Cronides who lived probably about 15,000 years ago traveled. So everywhere that they went, somebody interacted with them. So somebody's going to have their story based on what they were given per these people. But there will be a commonality because it's the same people traveling. And what I also pointed out was that even one of the goddesses in African mythology, Mami Wata, could be shown as a black woman and a white woman. But we started to talk a little more, and I feel this person was trying to say something like black genes were dominant. Well, I don't know what that means. Okay, nobody's dominant just because you're black or white or whatever. I just don't subscribe to any of that kind of egotistic philosophy. But what I was trying to point out is you've got to get off of this egocentric point of view. And what I could see, this guy started to talk about evolution and going back to some earlier things beyond these cronides. And what I'm pointing out is that right now, the science evolution wants you to think linearly and singularly. They want to go back to one point of origin, which is almost like this one world order, one world religion. But in this case, it would be a one race or a one animal predecessor. What I was trying to point out is I don't believe in that. I believe there was some kind of co-development, coexistence. There could have been multiple evolutions or whatever you want to call it going on at the same time. And there are people that believe in that too. They call it multi-regional theory, but they don't go far enough back. I believe they go to the Homo erectus and say that it went out and then it started to go off in its own direction in various places. But when I was taking these classes at the university at night in evolution and anthropology, and what they're teaching is that things change over time. There's natural selection and mutations, but they don't have it all down. And they are still trying to figure it out. They basically look at fossil evidence and other evidence and try and put a timeline together of what life was like on this planet. And things have changed incredibly. Just some of the things I've been looking at lately, such as giant turtles as big as a car, that no longer exist. All of these dinosaurs that at first they were telling us were reptiles, now they're telling us that some of them were birds and that birds are their descendants. But things have changed incredibly on this planet. There's a petrified forest out in Arizona. That used to be a lush area. What happened? It's desert now. And we don't know. We don't know what changed on this planet. And they do the same thing for humans, and they've gone back and they've looked at these creatures that they say are hominids back in Africa, a lot of them out of Ethiopia and other places like Chad. But they were able to find these things because it was a desert area and there was nothing in the way to dig, no trees or any of that, no jungle. So they found some of these, and they've categorized a lot of them as Australopithecus, which really looks like a chimpanzee to me. But and then they go into the Homo family, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Neanderthal, and then to Homo sapiens, modern humans. And the oldest bipedal they've found is Sahelanthropus chadenus, which is about 7 million years ago. So when you start to look at these things, and I put up something from Bone Clones, which compares primate, and primate is gorilla, bonobo, chimpanzee, and orangutan, and then they got a human skull in there. But comparing it right next to the fossils of humans, ancient hominids, so to say. And what you'll notice is that in these ancient hominids, as I said, the Australopithecus tend to look more chimpanzee-like, and then when you get into these the Homo species, it starts to look more humanoid. But a lot of them have a prognathism, a slope-back skull, but the skulls are small. They didn't have a large brain capacity, and they have a thicker brow ridge. And what they were doing to figure out these creatures were bipedal, and I asked this in one of my night classes, was they were looking at something called the foramen magnum, which is the hole at the base of the skull where the spinal cord comes out. And they were looking at where it was centered. And it would be more towards the back if it wasn't a bipedal species, I believe. But for the human, it was that was bipedal, was more centered. So you kind of imagine that as you're standing up, or where that spinal cord is going into the skull. So they're looking at that, but you got to remember a lot of these ancient fossils, they didn't find 100% complete skeletons. I think Lucy was only 40% of a complete skeleton that they found. And, mostly, though, they found these skulls, which could tell them a lot. But those earlier skulls, like I said, a lot of them look like chimpanzees. And some of these Australopithecus look to me like gorillas. But you could go on boneclones.com and take a good look at all the hominid sets for yourself. And most of these ancient hominids were below 4 feet tall. So that's quite a bit of a difference. But that is the theory of evolution, and they can never really tell you what makes that change happen other than natural selection. Most genetic mutations are deleterious. In other words, they don't create something great. It creates what you would call like a genetic defect. So that whole science of evolution is still under scrutiny and developing, but they found these fossils, and they put a record together of what the timeline is based also on their estimate of how old the fossil is with the current science. And there you have it. But there are a lot of people today that don't believe in evolution. They don't believe that humans came from a common ancestor of apes. So there are people also that believe we came from reptiles, which could be a possibility. It could be a possibility. And then there's people that believe aliens or reptiles modified the genetics of these apes and made us, and we're a hybrid. And there's people that have religious beliefs that believe we magically came out of dirt from an invisible sky god that thought it, and then somehow we just came from the earth. And other theories. But basically, it's interesting to me because if you let's get back to the story of Lucy. If you start looking at the words, it just seems to be another play on the stories and all of this encoded information and gematria. So I want to read a little bit about this. Let's get back to this early human ancestor. Lucy died falling out of a tree. From the BBC News article, it says, new evidence suggests that the famous fossilized human ancestor, dubbed Lucy by scientists, died falling from a great height, probably out of a tree. CT scans have shown injuries to her bones similar to those suffered by modern humans in similar falls. The 3.2 million year old hominin was found on a treed floodplain, making a branch her most likely final perch. It bolsters the view that her species, Australopithecus afarensis, spent at least some of its life in the trees. Writing in the journal Nature, researchers from the US and Ethiopia describe a vertical deceleration event, which they argue caused Lucy's death. In particular, they point to a crushed shoulder joint of the sort seen when we humans reach out our arms to break a fall, as well as fractures of the ankle, leg, bones, pelvis, ribs, vertebrae, arm, jaw, and skull. We weren't there, we didn't see it, but the subset of fractures that we've identified are fully consistent with what's reported in a voluminous orthopedic surgical literature about fall victims who have come down from height, said lead author John Kappelman from the University of Texas at Austin. It's tested every day in emergency rooms all around the planet. Discovered in Ethiopia's Afar region in 1974, Lucy's 40% complete skeleton is one of the world's best known fossils. She was around 1.1 meters or 3 feet 7 inches tall and is thought to have been a young adult when she died. Her species, Australopithecus afarensis, shows signs of having walked upright on the ground and had lost her ancestors' ape-like grasping feet, but also had an upper body well suited to climbing. The bones on this well-studied skeleton are in fact laced with fractures that we've identified like most fossils. Let me read that again. The bones of this well-studied skeleton are in fact laced with fractures like most fossils. But when modern tools such as high-resolution CD scanners researchers can start to unpick which ones were injuries and which ones happened during the intervening millennia. These fractures have been known since she was discovered. Professor Kappelman told BBC News, "I've looked at this fossil for 30 years and I knew that these fractures were there. It was during a brief break in Lucy's 2008 tour of the U.S. museums that he and his colleagues found time for the scans." And it continues on that he had to talk to the Ethiopian government. And they worked 24/7, 10 days straight without a break. He says, what it allows us to do is literally look inside mineralized rocks and bones. And Lucy, as much as we love her, she's a rock. She's fully mineralized. Okay, so now I'm going to continue on. The thing that I thought interesting on this is they said that she also broke her top rib in another article, which is usually not something that happens. So she really had to fall hard. Okay, you could read this article. I'll put a link. But the point that I'm trying to tell you here, and also you should have caught that he said that all of these, all of these fossil skeletons have fractures. That's not uncommon. But now they're trying to say that this was from a fall. So here we have a play on words. Lucy, like Lucifer, falling out of a tree, took a great fall, broke her ribs. I just feel like they're just constantly playing with the people's subconscious. And maybe this happened. Maybe that's why they're able to find these skeletons, because they fell out of a tree and nobody back then buried them. But you have to ask, like I said, go back and look at this bone clones and how close these ancient hominids look to a chimpanzee, which is pretty darn close. And like I said, the Australopithecines look more like a gorilla. Not exactly, but close. And, how do you know this wasn't some ancestor of a chimpanzee and a gorilla with some sort of variation in that foramen magnum, and that you don't have that today in chimpanzees and gorillas? I don't think anybody's that I've ever seen has done an extensive amount of research, and maybe they have, but on foramen magnums of the current species, because there's a limited number of these apes, and how are you going to get their skulls? Could you do this without hurting the animal? Could you do a scan? But how do you know that that isn't part of their species to have that variation, which means they might be able to stand upright, but they don't prefer to do that? You don't. But they're basically trying to say that these slight changes occurred, and then humans eventually came from this millions of years of changes. And then on top of it, you have brain size, or the skull size for the brain. And how did that happen? And a Neanderthal, which is completely out of place because its brain capacity was actually bigger than modern humans. And when I was in my night classes, I asked about that, and so did other people, and there's no explanation. Yet they basically try and state that Neanderthal was shorter than modern humans, but their skull capacity was larger, which makes no sense. And then they tell you that Neanderthal went extinct, and then now they tell you that their DNA is part of European DNA and has never been found in black people's DNA. So, by that logic, since black people are, and white people and Asian people and brown people are all considered modern humans that only came around maybe 30,000 years ago, white people, are you saying, is the theory trying to say white people came first because they have Neanderthal DNA and Neanderthal goes back millions of years and predates modern human? So those are the questions you could start asking, and if you do ask them, there will be no answer from these professors. Just as there was no answer as to why a Neanderthal skull or the Neanderthal skulls had a larger capacity than modern humans, which, in my opinion, shows something missing in that time scale. And that, in my opinion, has to do with these giants, whatever they were. And they're interbreeding with whatever was on this planet. And there is a species, Gigantopithecus. It's an ape that they found jawbone of that was supposed to be huge. But they don't talk about that too much. How do you know something didn't come off of that line? Or, as you get into some of this reptilian theory that shows these reptoids, whatever they are, with these elongated skulls, how do you know that that situation didn't occur where there was some interbreeding? And again, humans have 46 chromosomes, and these apes have 48. This is a genetic difference. That's another thing they're trying to explain, and they believe that some of the chromosomes combined long ago to create humans. So this whole evolution theory in science and all of that, that's still in development. And there's a lot of holes and unexplained things in those theories. So to kind of just wrap this up, I just feel like they know there was something else going on this planet. And like, as I've told you, they deliberately get rid of skeletons with this repatriation nonsense in America, because they know that they don't make sense, and they blow away the official story of history. And just like they got rid of a lot of these bones of giants and deny their existence. And then they give you these stories about Lucy falling out of a tree, breaking her rib, which sounds like a variation of your Garden of Eden story. And to me, it's just another, I'm just going to say it. And the doctor's name sounded incredibly Jewish to me, Professor Kappelman. I just feel like they are playing games with subliminal programming and embedding their stories and their mystery cults in your media and your science and their gematria, their numbers. And it's always similar names of certain people that get written about, when there's plenty of other intelligent people with other theories that don't get media coverage. So when someone tells me that I have to show proof of my theories, and that when I get scientific acceptance of my theories to let them know, I just kind of look at them with laughter, because they are just so clueless as to how controlled everything is, and how it's being, science and the news and your media and your movies are being manipulated to keep you in a matrix and use the same story over and over and over and over with variations, and embedded with gematria and colors that are coded, and symbols and words. And it's done to keep you in a prison. It's done to keep you at a level of an animal, so you never could get out of it. So you can never think past the matrix that they want you to be in. And even this thought mode of a singular ancestor, which again goes to, one common ancestor, one world order, one world religion, one world bank, and who's behind those entities and controlling it. It keeps you in that trap, so you can never get out of your slave plantation. And I just find it interesting that people come up and tell me, prove what you're saying with your cronide theory. Prove that blacks didn't come first, or they didn't come out of Africa. Well, who gave you that stuff? Who gave you that stuff? And why? Where's the 100% proof of what you're saying? Because nobody certainly has gone into the Congo in the lush jungle and dug there to see what bones are there. Nor have they done a proper examination of what's been found over in America. In fact, I know for a fact they dumped those bones. So I'm just pointing this out. You need to get off of that trap and the plantation that they've kept you on, and start thinking outside the box they want you to be on. I've given you proof through the writings of hundreds of books, plus all of the comparative mythology and comparative archaeology, looking at artifacts, and even telling you that they're getting rid of bones in America. The Smithsonian did it at Lovelock Cave. They're not telling you the truth. Take a class in anthropology or in evolution. Ask that professor why the skull of a Neanderthal is different and has a larger capacity than modern humans. But yet all of the predecessors to Neanderthal had small skulls, slightly bigger than apes, chimps, and gorillas, not as big as modern humans. Ask them, what is Neanderthal? Where did it come from? Why does its head slope back? Why does it have an occipital bun and nothing else does? Why does it have a larger skull? And what happened to Gigantopithecus? They don't have answers. They don't. So that's what I'm trying to do with my work, is to get you out of this cult, get you out of this box that they've kept you in, and open up your mind so you can look at things differently and realize you're not getting the truth. You're not getting the whole picture of what happened on this planet. And something major happened on this planet. And the stories that they tell you of evolution, they're not true because they can't, at least, or they're not fully complete. So you can't just accept what crap they tell you. Oh, there's no bones of red-haired people in America. No, they didn't come here. No giants ever. No reptilian beings. No, they all came out of one place in Ethiopia from one ancestor. One common ancestor. Just like they're going to have a one world order, a one world government, a one world religion, a one world origin, just for you. You got to wake up. That's it.